verses 13 and 14. The blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who were ceremonially unclean, or more correctly common, sanctify them so that they are outwardly clean. How much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God. Let's pray. We thank you, ever-living, holy God, our Father, that you have cleansed our conscience from the stain of sin and have consecrated us with the blood of Jesus so that we may serve you as your holy priests here on earth. We pray that you'll give us your Holy Spirit so that through your word you may sanctify everything we do and say and think in this session and in this day. We commend ourselves, our congregations, your holy church throughout the world, and all suffering people everywhere, to you in Jesus' holy name. Amen. The topic for today is the theology of worship in Leviticus. Now, to understand Leviticus, you need to realize that Leviticus doesn't give us a lengthy abstract theology of worship, but it gives us a practical theology of worship. It does theology practically by the doing of it, the doing of worship. This is very important for us because the divine service, the word and sacrament, comes from and is based in part on the divine service at the temple in Jerusalem. You may remember, or not, that in Romans chapter 9, Paul begins to reflect on the role of Israel in God's plans and purposes, 9 through to 11. You remember those chapters there? And right at the beginning, he lists what he regards as the heritage that we, who are the Church of Jesus Christ, have received from the people of God in the Old Testament. There are 7 things that we've received, and the 8th, which is not what we receive, but is the culmination of this, is Jesus according to the flesh, the Christ according to the flesh. And one of those 7 things that we have as a heritage from the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, is the Latria. Latria, the service. The service. And Paul here is talking about the divine service, the daily service, the daily morning and evening sacrifice at the temple in Jerusalem. And he says this is part of our heritage in Christ. We have received the service and we continue the service. And he also adds to that we have received not just the service but also the glory, the doxa, the divine presence of God, the glory of God. And that glory is now no longer in that temple building, but is in the flesh of Jesus, the body of Jesus. It's worth looking at those 7 things, by the way, if I can just do an aside. If you like, that's an excellent summary of a Christian theology of the Old Testament. It's an epitome of the Old Testament. The glory and the service. By the way, if you're interested, I think in the reading list that I gave to you, I mentioned that there's a little booklet which the bookshop here publishes of lectures that I gave on the glory and the service, then which was taped and then was transcribed and re-edited. It's available there in the bookshop, the glory and the service. I just throw that in because I can only deal with this topic, very important topic, in a limited way, particularly the connection between the divine service in the Old Testament and the divine service in the church. If you're interested in this further, get hold of it. It's there in the bookshop. At least it was there in the bookshop last time I was there. I haven't had a chance to check. I see that some people actually have it's had copies. I saw some copies around here. Okay, now, what's the function of the divine service? Leviticus treats worship, the divine service, in very practical ways. What's it meant to do? What's its function? Now, a number of points in connection with this. First of all, the divine service is not the service for the priest, but for the whole of Israel. Kleinig principle, what's it? Look for the unexpected. Every morning, every evening, the divine service was enacted for Israel. Now, if that's the case, what would you expect to follow from there? If it's for Israel, therefore, all the Israelites should participate, should be present. But we spoke about that at the end of yesterday, that your average Israelite only appeared at the temple 2 or 3 times a year. So the divine service was performed, if you like, vicariously on behalf of the whole of Israel, not only for those who were there, which on some days would have just been the priest's on duty. Anybody could come any day they liked, but in most days there were hardly any people there. Just as there's sometimes here in chapel where there's very few people of the community appearing for afternoon prayer or vespers or compline. And yet that service is the service of the community and on behalf of the whole community. The service is for the whole of Israel, not just the priests, and for the benefit of the whole of Israel, not just the priests. And this daily service, in this daily service, 3 kinds of offerings were presented to God. The most important part of the offerings was a male lamb, about a year old. Now, if any of you know anything about sheep, male lamb, year old, is just in its prime. In fact, the best lamb comes from males who are about a year old. And you don't keep male sheep for breeding purposes. All you need in any flock is 1 ram, and you usually eat male sheep when they are a year old. In Australia, we castrate them and keep them for wool because they produce a lot of wool. But people in the ancient world kill them off around about 9 months to a year. So that's the basic. Every morning, every evening, a lamb was presented to God. Secondly, there was the grain offering. The grain offering, and the technical term for that was mincha. The technical term for me is stupidity. Mincha. And that means just a gift or a present. Mincha. It can be, gift, tribute, present, generally, and in a very specific sense, it is the agricultural foodstuff that is presented at the temple. Now, the grain offering, the mincha, consists of 3 different items. There's flour, wheat flour, fine wheat flour, sifted wheat flour, the best wheat flour. And take notice of that. Basically, there's two kinds of flour for people in the ancient world. Most people could only afford to eat barley. Barley grows very easily everywhere in the Middle East. Wheat will only grow in some areas, and so wheat is the much more precious of the two substances, makes far better bread. It's the fine flour, fine bread, best grain that they eat there. They don't grow corn the way you do here. So it's wheat flour, and then together with the wheat flour there's olive oil, and that's mixed with the flour so that the flour can be easily burnt on the altar. If you put flour on coals, what are you going to have? What's going to happen? It doesn't ignite completely immediately. Unless it's very good fine, it'll smoulder and smoke and stink. Flour stinks. You've all had smoke out in the kitchen when you burn some flour, or your wife's burned some flour. So the mixture, very fine olive oil, makes it flammable, so that if you have that mixture of flour and olive oil, you put it on the coals and whoosh. And then the third ingredient is incense. Incense. Now, that incense is also mixed with the flour and olive oil, so that instead of the flour stinking, what does the flour do as it burns? It's a sweet smell. Now, when you put that flour, olive oil, incense on the altar, you don't actually see the flames. People who stand out in the courtyard see only one thing, and you've got to envisage it. Always, when you get something like this, particularly with worship, you've got to picture it, because it's not ideas, you've got to see it, and then you make sense of it if you see it. What happens, so you can imagine the altar. I'll come back to this, but just to deal with it each. So the priest stands this side of the altar. At the temple, it's a huge altar, and there's steps going up. He throws the handfuls of the flour, olive oil, incense on the altar. It burns, and what do people see? A column of smoke, dark black smoke, that rises from the altar upwards. Column of smoke. Does that ring a bell? The cloud. Yes? The pillar of cloud, the glory cloud, which contains the glory of God, hides, encases the glory of God. And then thirdly, the third component is the drink offering, the naesich, consisting of very fine, good wine, and it has to be pretty good wine, because you need enough alcohol in it too, so that it will burn. So add that together, meat, flour, mixed with olive oil and wine, and what you get? A good meal. Not just your ordinary meal, because the ordinary meal is olive oil, bread and wine. And people used to drink wine in the ancient world mixed with water. A lot of the water is contaminated, and you would disinfect any problems with water by mixing it with wine. So you get not just an ordinary meal, but a top quality meal, restaurant style meal, festive meal. Now, any questions on that? Yes?
Is anything unprocessed ever offered?
Well, unprocessed meat is offered.
Well, it's prepared.
Okay, yes, in the sense, no, it's all processed.
Everything's processed.
Processed, yes. It's not raw material. The closest you get is roasted barley.
How's that relate, or is what about the offering that Cain makes?
Yeah.
Is that?
All we know it's this.
We don't know. Okay.
It's not a meat sacrifice. It's not an animal sacrifice. It's cereal sacrifice. But what cereals? What? And in any case, that's before the institution of the divine service. So there's no laws, regulations. The normal rules in the ancient world, and offerings and sacrifices you find everywhere, in all cultures, is that you present offerings of the produce of the land. You need to remember that you're dealing basically with agricultural communities in which almost every person lives on the land, and you don't have a trading economy, you have a subsistence economy. It's only archaeologists have already pointed out that, say, in Israel, it's only around about 700, the time of Hezekiah, that, as far as we can gather, that you begin to get a trading economy where farmers began to produce surplus material, and the material that they produced surplus of was olive oil and wine, and there were markets for that in the Mediterranean world. Yes.
Would it, and you alluded to, and I want to know how far you take the smoke coming off the altar,
Yes.
and certainly, the cloud of the glory.
Okay, let's leave that because I'm going to spend a bit of time on that. That's very important. That's why I mentioned it. Now, if I spend some time on something, I'm preparing the ground for something else. Richard?
This offering is early morning and dusk. What about the...
Okay, I'm coming to that. Yep. Okay. Now, okay. That's the stuff of the service. That's the raw material that's used in the service. And the service is enacted at a very significant times. It's not accidental, but very significant time in the morning at the turn of the day and in the evening, afternoon at the turn of the day. So it's the two critical points of the day. Just as in the year, the two critical points of the year are the spring equinox and the autumn equinox, the turning points of the year. The year turns on the equinoxes, not solstices. The agriculturally speaking, what's significant is the equinoxes, not the solstices. You measure the year from the solstices, but agriculturally, what's significant is yes, you know what I mean.
When it's spoken of in Leviticus, it's spoken of the same way as it is in Genesis, or evening and morning, the first day. Is it the same kind of embracing of the day that way?
Yes, because if you present offerings at the turning points of the day, what it does is includes the whole of the day, because it includes what follows. So the evening sacrifices covers the whole of the night, and the morning sacrifice covers the whole of the day. And if you think in terms of holiness, the evening sacrifice sanctifies what part of the day? The night, and that's the dark part, that's the dangerous part, that's very significant, sanctifies night and sleep. And then the morning sacrifice sanctifies the day and all the work that you do during the day. Now this is great significance for our Christian theology of the daily office and daily prayer, morning and evening, and that's connected with the Shema, morning and evening. But don't get me off that, that's a different topic. So the times are very significant, morning and evening, because the divine service is meant to sanctify not just people and places and the work of people and places and things like bread and wine and meat, but it's meant to sanctify time, holy times. The holy time. Now, the order in which the service is enacted is the following. I'd like to run you through, let's just say, roughly speaking, morning service, as far as we can gather, at the tabernacle, and then later at the temple.
I'll try to do it.
Now, will you hear right if I go over there? So, you've got your staff, you've got the time. Morning sacrifice. priest comes on duty. Let's say you're the priest that one of the group of priests that's scheduled, and you're in charge of the divine service today. It's a bit late now, but put yourself back to about 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock, you come, clock in, and you begin your work. Now, the first thing that the priest on duty, all the stuff would be prepared beforehand. The lamp would have been set aside. We don't know where it was kept, probably outside somewhere. And the flour and olive oil and incense, all that's prepared in advance. But the first thing that you do, and this is not part of the service, it's preparation for the service, is that you come to the altar. That's the very first thing you do. You come to the altar and you clear away the fatty remains from the previous day, the bones if there were anything, the ashes, and you uncover the coals on the altar and you get wood and you stoke up the fire. Now that's the first day. Why do you have to do it first? Because it needs to burn a while to produce the basic, most important thing, which is coals. So you get wood that produces coals, and there's particular kinds of wood in the Middle East that produce coals. I don't know what it is here in North America, but basically hardwood produces the best coals. So oak, I think, something like that you use there. In Australia, it would be eucalyptus, because that produces very good coals that last for a long time. So you stoke the fire, produce the coals. Okay, then secondly, this is preparatory, you would go to this side here, the north side of the altar, and you would slaughter the lamb and prepare the lamb. Now can I emphasize, the slaughtering of the lamb is not the sacrifice, it's not the offering, it's merely preparation. And the slaughtering is done in a particular way. In fact, in Hebrew, there is a verb that's used for ritual slaughter. I won't give you the Hebrew, it's not really true. Ritual slaughter. Now, what's ritual slaughter? Normally speaking, you kill animals in a very simple way. When my father used to kill sheep, we'd eat sheep on the farm, and when I was young, I'd kill lots of sheep. What do? You get a knife, cut the throat, break the neck. So you cut the throat, break the neck. And the animal dies very quickly. But you couldn't cut the throat and break the neck. Why not? You've got to get all the blood out of the animal. So there's a particular technical way, which the Muslims still do, which is to cut the arteries along the side of the neck, and then you drain every bit of blood from the animal. Now, what's important, you see, is that you don't sever the spinal column, because the heart needs to keep on pumping to pump out all the blood. So all the blood is drained from the animal, and that blood is put in basin somewhere here and kept ready. Then, now you need to know that you don't do this by yourself. There's a whole group of priests, and it's all spread out. But I'll just say it's one person, so not to confuse you. After the blood's been drained out, the animal is skinned, the way you normally do to prepare it to eat, and then you butcher it. You cut it into its various segments. You skin it, you remove the intestines and the offal from the intestines, and what's very important is that you remove all the fat around the intestines. You remove the kidneys with the fat around the kidneys. Sheep, their kidneys are encased in fat, and you remove the liver with its lobes. It's very important that you remove them, and you put them aside in particular places. The intestines, we don't know quite clearly whether the offal was removed from the intestines or the intestines were just put aside and burnt. Now that's a little unclear, and even the rabbis argue about exactly what you do here. All that is, the animals got ready, and then comes the ritual. And the ritual, the order, if you like, the order of service occurs in the following stages. If you like, there are 4, or depends on how you chop it up, 5 stages. So it's just as we have various parts of the divine service. You've got confession, absolution, you have the entry, the intro, you have the service of the word, you have the prayer of the church, you have the communion, and then post-communion. Okay? The service goes into those various parts. So you have very clear stages in the divine service, and all of these stages are very significant theologically. And see if you can work out from what we've done what the theological function of each of these stages is. Okay? Beginning of the service. The priest on duty comes to the altar, in front of the altar, and then he goes to, first of all, to the north side. We don't know whether it's this corner or that corner, but he stands there, and one of his assistants hands half of the blood in a bowl to him, and he splashes it. Let's say he stands here. He stands here, and in a movement like that, splashes all the blood against this side and this side of the altar. Then he goes down here, and he splashes the rest of the blood against this side of the altar. And every bit of the blood has to be put against the altar. Splashed against the altar. There's a technical term in Hebrew for splashing, and for splashing against the altar. After that, before that he would vest himself, so he puts on his priestly vestments, and they're kept somewhere, probably around here somewhere. So he's vested as he does this. He's vested in God's holiness. Remember we spoke about that. Then he comes to the basin here, and he washes his hands, and he washes his feet. Baptism. He washes. In the Septuagint, in most places that's translated or can be translated as baptizo. So he washes his hands and his feet. Now, why does he wash his hands and feet? Question, not answer? Okay, then after he's washed his hands and feet, then the assistants will hand to him, let's go back. He will go into the holy place, and he will attend to the lampstand. Clear that up. Now we're not sure whether this happens at this point, but that's it. He enters the sanctuary, he enters the holy place, and trims the lamps and gets them ready for the evening when they're lighted. So that's after his hands and his feet have been washed. He does this. Then he comes out again, and one of the assistants hands to him coals that have been taken from the altar here, and those coals are put in a pan, which he holds in his right hand, and then there's another container in which another priest who's on duty, which hands to him, and that container contains the incense, the most holy, precious incense. And there's a secret recipe that can only be used at the tabernacle. Anybody who uses it anywhere else is put to death. Okay, so the incense and the coals are given to him. And he doesn't put them together there, but he comes into the holy place and stands before the incense altar. And he enters with the full priestly regalia. It's not just your vestment, but the breastplate with the Urim and Thummim and the names of the 12 tribes of Israel on his breast. So he brings the people of Israel into God's presence. He carries them by name into God's presence before the altar. And then he stands before the altar, puts the coals on the altar, and then the incense on the altar. And that kind of incense is very, very powerful. It's very pungent, and it's flammable. So as soon as you're there, what happens? Catches fire, and smoke fills, very, very quickly, smoke fills all this, the incense smoke and fragrance fills the whole of the space. And then he comes out, And there's some rabbinical things which speak about people smelling the coming of the priest. How could you smell him? Because the incense would permeate his vestments, his hair, everything would be going in. So he comes in, if you like, taking his BO in, his body odour, and he brings out the sweet savour of God's presence. So he burns the incense. On the incense altar, you know what that's like, I don't have to describe that, before the curtain, in front of the mercy seat. Now you need to know that the Ark of the Covenant with the mercy seat and the cherubim forms the throne of God. The throne of God. And here God is enthroned. This is his armchair. This is his throne. This is where he sits. Hidden in darkness, his glory is here. But the priest doesn't enter the Holy of Holies. He comes to the altar and stands in front of the curtain. But there's not much space. It's probably a little bit wrong here. It's a little bit closer to there. There's not much space between the incense altar and the throne of God. After he's done that then, he comes out and he hands, the two pans, the incense pan and the incense container over to the fellow priest. Once again washes his hands and his feet, and then comes to the altar. Now we don't know for sure whether this altar had steps. It probably did. It's low enough to be able to access without steps. But at the temple, this is a huge apparatus, huge dimensions, and there were steps here on the south side, and the priest would come on the south side, and there was a boardwalk around the edge for the priest who was presenting the burnt offering and the grain offering to God. Okay, so the priest comes and stands in, probably at the tabernacle, stands in front of the altar here. Remember, the whole surface of the altar is covered with live coals. And the first thing he does is puts out the various pieces of the lamb on the coals on the altar. And it's done in such a way that the meat from the lamb is meant to cover the whole surface of the altar. You can imagine that way. I'm standing here. So the north side's where you start. East side's where you approach. You always approach God from the east. And you start from the north. What would you put up here at the top of the altar? What part of the lamb? No, you got rid of all the blood. The blood's gone. It's not. The blood isn't burnt. The blood is splashed against the altar. Not the fat. You start off with the head. This is the head of the altar, so you put the head of the animal at the head of the altar. So the head and the neck is placed there, and then variously, then you put the whole rest of the lamb in a forequarter here, there, and this part here, and at the centre of the altar, as far as we know, you put the best part, which is the fat and the kidneys and the liver is put across the centre there, and then what you put back down here? Now, there's something very significant, and it's very significant for the New Testament. And you need to see this, you need to imagine this. What happens is that the burnt offering of the lamb is the carrier of all other offerings. All other offerings are placed where? On top of the lamb. The Hebrew term is al. They're placed on top of the lamb, and they feel like added to the lamb. But the lamb is the basic offering, the basic sacrifice. It carries, it bears, it includes all other offerings. So the lamb is set out piece by piece, and you can imagine every piece is handed to the priest. He puts it in a proper place, picks up, puts it in its proper place. After he's done that, then he takes the priest brings to him the whole container with the flour from the cereal offering, which has been mixed with olive oil and incense. The incense actually is separate. And you can work out why in a minute, why the incense is kept separate. And he then gets a handful of the flour mixed with olive oil, adds the incense to it, and scatters it over the surface of the altar. And as I said before, this produces a column. Now, and this column is a sweet-smelling column. And that helps to explain a term that recurs again and again in Leviticus, because you offer the sacrifice as what? A sweet-smelling aroma or savour to the Lord or for the Lord. It's the sweet smell of God's grace and God's gracious presence and God's gracious acceptance of his people. The sweetness of God is proclaimed not through the eyes and ears, but to the nose. You smell God's sweetness. You smell God's acceptance. Now, there's lots of reference to that in the Old Testament and then also the New Testament, if you're aware of it. And then after that, then the wine is poured out on the altar. So the wine's poured out on the altar. Okay. That's that stage. So stage 1, splashing of blood. Stage 2, burning of incense. Stage 3 is the presentation of the offering. Now there is a technical term for this here. Quite practically, what does the placement of the lamb and the flour and the wine on the altar produce? What does it produce? Think from the point of view of the congregation. Not theologically, practically. What does it produce?
They're cooking it.
Well, it cooks it, and it smells. There's two things. It produces smoke and smell. Notice, so it produces smoke and smell. There is a Hebrew word which you can overlook the significance of, which recurs again and again in Leviticus and all the priestly texts, which is, you put the things on the altar and you burn it, usually, but that misses the ritual significance of it. The term is, the noun for smoke is quoter, and the PL verb for that is quiter, which means to make smoke or to make sweet-smelling incense. Quotereth, a noun from that, is incense. So the purpose of offering the sacrifice is to turn them into smoke, to smoke them up to the Lord, to smoke them. If you want to follow that further and look at the references, just go to my commentary. So you produce smoke. Stage 1, splashing of blood. Stage 2, burning of incense. Stage 3, the smoking up of the sacrifices. And stage 4, after the priest had finished then, he would stand here in front of the altar and he'd be flanked by his fellow priests. He'd lift up his hands and he would pronounce the Aaronic benediction using the holy name. And this is the only verbal part of the regular service. And notice the use of the holy name here. And I'll use it for you, even though I don't like using it. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his panim, his face, shine on you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his panim, his face, his countenance, lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So the performance of the Aaronic benediction. Now the location here is significant. In ritual, as in real estate, location is everything. Can I repeat that? In ritual, in the divine service, and I'd say also in theology, location is everything. Then, that's the actual service. 4 stages, and then there is the 5th stage, which is part of the service, and yet, in a sense, is separated from it in a little way. And that's stage 5 is the holy meal. After this has been done, then the priests have finished the service, at least the public service, and they then retire. They'll divest themselves, and then some of the priests would already be at work, taking the leftover flour mixed with olive oil, and they would make bread. Make bread, and then it's getting, mid-morning or something, they don't have anything to eat until after the sacrifice. They would eat the holy meal, and they would eat bread which had come from God, most holy bread. And since it's most holy bread, it can only be eaten by the priest on duty within these confines. Now, just to complete the picture, in case you don't, after this had been done, then the people can come and present their sacrifices. And basically, the daily burnt offering presents gives the template, the framework for every other offering. So that's the master plan, the template, and all other ones follow this basic pattern with variations. So you have 5 stages. Can I go through them again? And you need to see the whole 5. The splashing of the blood, the burning of incense, the smoking up of the offerings, the benediction, and the eating of the holy meal. Someone here. Okay. Now I want to explore the significance of this. First of all, I want you to meditate on and to focus and analyze the arrangement of the tabernacle and everything in it. Okay? There's only one entrance to the tabernacle, and that's here on the east side. The tabernacle, there are 2 courts. There's the outer court, there's the inner court. What's the center of the outer court? The altar. I've tried to present that diagrammatically this way. What you have here is a perfect cube. You have a cube here, or square, equal size. And you have a second. The second court is likewise. What's the center of the inner court? Not just the Holy of Holies, but the throne, the mercy seat. Right, the Ark of the Covenant down here. On top of the Ark of the Covenant, you have the mercy seat, the Koferet, and then on top of the mercy seat, you have the cherubim, which form the back and the sides of the throne of God. And just that way. Now, this is God's place. God's space. Whose place is this? Not just priests, but Israel's place. If you think in terms of human houses, this is God's private quarters. This is his office. You think a king who leads his army in battle sets up a tent. This is his private quarters, his sleeping room, his personal space, his study. This is private space. This is business space, where the king meets with his courtiers, the general meets with his chief of staff, transacting his business. This is the meeting place. Now, what's interesting about the movement in the divine service is that if this was a pagan temple, where would be the place? If this was a pagan temple, what would replace the altar? The Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat here in the Holy of Holies. The idol would be there. Okay? So this takes the place of the idol. Secondly, if this was a pagan sanctuary, where would you meet with your God? Let's say this was a temple of Baal. The idol is the means of accessing the God. And you come into this place, the Holy of Holies. And then on festival days, the idol would be taken in procession from the temple out through the town or village, whatever the case would be, and you would follow the idol and you would walk after your God in procession. And if you get to India, make sure you get there at one of the great Hindu festivals and you can see the whole thing still being paraded in front of you. Saw it just at the beginning of January. I was in Andhra Pradesh during Pongal, one of the most important festive weeks in the Hindu calendar down in southern India. Saw the procession of idols, people going in procession after the idol. Okay? This is the place for meeting. Now everything's turned on the head. And the altar then is where? The altar is in front of the idol. In front of the idol, not separated from the idol, because what's the function of sacrifices, offerings in paganism? That's theologically, but practically, it's to feed the God. To feed the God, to provide drink and food, and the best of food, and also a little bit of entertainment to keep him happy. So you lay out meat, cooked meat, you lay out best bread, you lay out fruits and all the other things in front of the God, and the God takes the essence of this out of it to feed himself, and then the priests eat the leftovers. But it's to feed a God. What will happen if you don't stop feeding a God? Number one, you'll be hungry, and he won't be a happy God. A hungry God is a God who's losing his power because he needs to get power. He needs to get more power, and God's always getting power at the expense of somebody or something else in paganism. Now, there's a limited amount of power in a closed universe, and so they need to accumulate power from other gods, from other beings, and the more offerings that are presented to him, what happens? The stronger the God gets, the more blessings the more resources he has at his disposal to give as perks to his followers. It sounds like a bit like a business corporation, doesn't it? The CEO, keep growing the business so that he can keep the shareholders happy. It's amazing how much that fits if you want to think it through. But now, everything is turned on its head here. The purpose of these offerings is not to provide a meal for God. God doesn't need meal. But what's the purpose of these offerings? Think in terms of a meal, it's to provide a meal for his people. A meal for his people. Whether it be the priests or the lay people. The lay people bring food stuff, and then they pick part of that. It's holy food stuff. That since it's been in God's presence, it's holy, and it brings blessing with it. Secondly, where is the meeting point between God and his people? Where is the meeting place? It's not here, but here. So God comes from here to here, and the people come here, and the meeting point and the meeting place is not the idol, but the altar. And the whole language of worship in the Old Testament reflects that. To appear before God, to present an offering before God, to stand before God, to stand in the presence of God, doesn't mean standing here, or even standing here. It means standing where? Here. This is the place where you access the face of God. Pagan people access the face of their gods through the idol. Quite literally, the face of the idol was the panim, the face, the presence of the god. Israelites access God here. God met with his people here. They don't come to him, he comes to them. Did you get that? Now, any questions on that before I start going back through the ritual?
Why is it not in the Holy of Holies with a burnt offering? Because God is enmeshed into the sacrifice?
Yes, God is enmeshed in sacrifice. God uses means, and he uses these things in the divine service to reach the people. So they don't have to put up a ladder to heaven to get to God. God comes down to earth and meets them where they are, and he meets them physically. He meets them physically, in this physical place, in this physical way, through these physical means. He comes to them and meets with them. Now, one last thing. Oh, yes.
So whenever it says, like, Abraham built an altar to the Lord,
Yes.
it's referring that God is coming to him outside of the tabernacle.
Yes.
But he is coming to him to receive whatever offering, worship, whatever that person is bringing.
Yes, and it's him coming in order to bless, to deliver blessing. I'll come to the altar and blessing in a minute. Yes.
Taste and see the Lord is good. Is that referred to the meal?
Of course. Just as in Christian terms, taste and see the Lord is good, at least in the Orthodox Christian tradition, always it's not just a vague, nice figure of speech. What is it referred to? Where do you taste and see how good, gracious the Lord is? In the Lord's Supper. I don't taste and see the Lord is good. Taste and see the Lord is good refers to eating the holy food stuff. Yes?
Then, where did the lambs come from for the first offering there? Was there a specific flock that priests had? Or did individual tribes present the lamb?
At different stages of Jewish history, you have different people being responsible for it. In the early stages, each tribe had responsibility. The 12 tribes for the 12 years to provide all the basic resources for the service. Then, during the monarchy, guess whose responsibility it was to provide for the daily offerings? The king. And the post-exilic period, it's the congregation takes the place of the king in providing the stuff for the service. Yes?
Why the second washing? I understand the person going from from the outer court to the holy place, but now he's done his work and now he comes back out. Why the washing again?
That's one of the questions. Anything else? Just there's break for lunch right now. I'll just say one final thing and then we'll come back to it. Just one final movement. Notice how one of the things that we have not observed in the last 100 years is the importance of place in theology and worship, holy place, and therefore movement in place. what's happened to some extent is that we have conceived our theology and worship so abstractly that it becomes a little bit discarnate, sort of in mental space or place. Notice how important location is here, and notice what the basic movement is. Think in terms of who's the key person in the ritual here. Is the high priest or his representative the person who is on duty? What's the basic movement? He comes in, first of all. And what does he bring into God? He brings the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay? So he comes in, bringing the people, representing the people, in the person of the congregation. What does he bring out? So imagine the congregation out here. What does he bring from here to here? Well, the smell is part of it, but think quite concretely. What's the last thing he does? The culmination of the service? A benediction. So he comes in, bringing the people, and he comes out, bringing God and his blessing to the people. And that blessing quite concretely is symbolized by the sweet smell that he brings from here, and the sweet smell that is produced here. Let's now have some holy food and some holy drink. We meet together then again at 2 o'clock, I think. Oh, 2 o'clock, yes. Just keep cranking on.